The unseen note in the smoke-filled jazz clubs of 1940s New York. Marcus possesses a trumpet talent that rivals the greats. Yet he is forced to enter through the kitchen door. While audiences weep at his soulful solos, the club owners refuse to let him drink from the same glasses as the patrons. When a famous producer offers him a contract, it comes with a devastating condition. A white musician will appear on the album cover instead of him. Marcus must decide whether to sell his sound and lose his face, or keep his dignity and remain unheard. His choice ultimately redefines the meaning of ownership in an industry built on theft. The note hung in the air, a shimmering tear in the fabric of the smoky Harlem night, before dissolving into a sigh that wrapped around every soul in the onyx. Marcus, midnight blue, eyes squeezed shut, brought the trumpet from his lips. The last echo of strange fruit vibrated through the brass, a lament and a raw cry for all that was denied. Silence, thick and heavy, descended, then burst into a thunderous ovation. Tables pounded, chairs scraped, and a cacophony of whistles and shouts rose from the packed house. Women dabbed at their eyes. Men clapped with a fervor that bordered on desperation. They saw him, truly saw him, for these precious moments. Not a man, but a sound, a feeling, a conduit for the collective ache and joy of a people. But the moment, like all others, was fleeting. The house lights, dim and sepia-toned, flickered on, and the magic dissipated like mist. The faces in the crowd, adoring moments before, now held a detached recognition. Marcus, sweat cooling on his brow, nodded a perfunctory thanks, the heavy weight of the trumpet feeling suddenly cold in his hands. He didn't linger. He couldn't. Through the back midnight, Big Louis, the bouncer, rumbled, his voice low enough not to carry beyond the stage's edge. It wasn't a question. It was the daily ritual, the unspoken covenant. No matter how many hearts he broke or mended with his horn, the front door, the main bar, the velvet-roped booths, they were not for him. Marcus walked, head high, past the hastily cleared tables, the appreciative murmurs now morphing into the clinking of glasses and the rising chatter of ordinary conversation. The scent of stale bourbon, cheap perfume, and expensive cigars clung to the air, a phantom luxury he was forbidden to partake in. The path was worn, familiar, down a short, narrow corridor, past the overflowing garbage cans, the sound of his own footsteps echoing against the plastered walls. He pushed through the swinging door that led into the kitchen. The kitchen was a stark universe away from the gilded glow of the club. The air hung thick with the smell of frying onions, burnt sugar, and industrial cleanser. Steam hissed from bubbling pots, and the clatter of plates was a jarring counterpoint to the melodies still resonating in his mind. Sammy, the cook, a mountain of a man with flour dusting his mustache, offered a silent, sympathetic nod as Marcus navigated past a towering stack of dirty dishes. "Hear that Holloway fella's here tonight," Sammy mumbled, not looking up from a sizzling steak. "Big shot producer. Comes in with that blonde dame on his arm, orders the best scotch, doesn't even watch the set properly." Marcus felt a familiar sting. Holloway, Sterling Thorne. He'd heard the whispers. Thorne, the notorious King Midas of Melody Makers Records, was known for his Midas touch, turning raw talent into gold records, but also for his iron grip and his notorious preference for certain kinds of faces on his album covers. He found his usual corner by the back exit, a splintered wooden chair tucked behind a stack of empty crates. He began the slow, meditative process of disassembling his trumpet, wiping each component with meticulous care. The cool metal, still warm from his breath, felt like a living thing in his hands. It was the only place he truly belonged. He heard the distinct tapping of expensive shoes on the linoleum floor, a sound that cut through the kitchen din like a razor. Then voices hushed but sharp. His tone, it's like nothing I've ever heard. Pure gold, sterling. And that control. He could make angels weep. It was the club owner, Mr. Maxwell, his usual bluster replaced by a sycophantic hush. Undeniable talent, Maxwell. A deeper, resonant voice replied. Marcus knew that voice instantly. Sterling Thorne carried an authority that brooked no argument. Raw, untapped, a diamond in the rough indeed. A pause. Marcus held his breath, his rag suspended over the trumpet's bell. "The problem is always Maxwell," Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is the rough part. He's got the sound, but he's got the face too." A cold dread seeped into Marcus's bones, colder than the metal in his hands. The face. His face. The deep ebony skin, the full lips, the coiled hair. The face that branded him, in their eyes, as merely the talent and never the star. "We could work around it, Mr. Thorne," Maxwell stammered, clearly sensing the tightrope he was on. "Promotional photos, careful lighting, always in shadow, perhaps." Thorne scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Maxwell, please. We're talking about melody makers. We don't work around problems. We solve them." The kitchen door swung open again, more forcefully this time. Two figures stood silhouetted against the dim light of the club's corridor. One was Maxwell, looking flustered. The other, tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, was Sterling Thorne. His silver hair, slicked back with an almost unnatural precision, gleamed even in the low light. His eyes, the color of chipped ice, swept over the chaotic kitchen before landing on Marcus. Marcus didn't flinch. He slowly reassembled his trumpet, fitting the valves back into place with deliberate slowness. Thorne approached, his expensive leather shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum. He stopped a foot from Marcus, his gaze unwavering, assessing. "Marcus Blue," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, yet filled with an undeniable power. "They call you Midnight. I understand why." Marcus merely looked up, a silent question in his eyes. He didn't trust the sudden gentleness. "Your performance tonight," Thorne continued, a hint of admiration, almost awe, in his tone. "It was transcendent. You possess a gift, son. A rare, unparalleled gift." Marcus felt a flicker of hope, hot and dangerous, igniting in his chest. This was it, the moment he'd dreamt of, to be seen, truly seen, by someone with the power to change his world. Thorne reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a slim, leather-bound portfolio. He opened it, revealing a crisp, official-looking document. "I'm Sterling Thorne, Melody Makers Records. I'm offering you a contract, Marcus. A full, exclusive recording deal. Royalties, tours, the works. The kind of deal no Negro musician has ever been offered in this country." The words hung in the air, glittering with impossible promise. Marcus's breath hitched. His heart hammered against his ribs. No Negro musician has ever been offered. The weight of history, of every unheard voice, every stolen melody, pressed down on him. This wasn't just for him. It was for all of them. "This," Thorne said, sliding the portfolio across the crate toward Marcus, "is your ticket out of these kitchens, out of the back alleys. This is your chance to be heard by the world, to define a generation." Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for the contract, his fingers brushing the cool leather. It was real. The words "Marcus Blue" were printed clearly on the first page, beneath a bold, embossed Melody Makers Records. He scanned the figures, his eyes widening. It was more money than he had ever dreamed of. More than his father had earned in a lifetime. "There's just one small detail," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a casual, almost conversational tone, as if discussing the weather. He pulled another photograph from his breast pocket, a glossy studio portrait. He laid it gently atop the contract. Marcus looked down. It was a picture of a man. White, blonde, with clear, unblemished skin and a meticulously styled pompadour. He held a trumpet, though his grip looked strangely unfamiliar, almost awkward. His eyes, blue and unremarkable, stared out with a practiced, confident smile. "This is Arthur Holloway," Thorne said, his gaze fixed on Marcus's face, watching for a reaction. "He's a talented young man, good-looking, marketable. He'll be the face of your music, Marcus. He'll be on the album covers, in the promotional shoots, in the magazines. He'll be the public persona. Your music, Marcus, will speak for itself. But Arthur will be the one they see." The words slammed into Marcus like a physical blow. The hope that had flared so brightly was extinguished in an instant, replaced by a cold, searing rage. He looked from the smiling, unfamiliar face on the photograph to Thorne's unreadable eyes, then back to the contract, now tainted. His music, his soul poured out note by agonizing note. To be claimed, packaged, and presented through another man's face. To be heard, yes, but to remain unseen, unacknowledged, erased. The club's distant murmur, the kitchen's chaotic clatter, Thorne's calm, predatory gaze, all faded into a deafening silence in Marcus's mind. The trumpet, his lifeline, now felt like a heavy, leaden weight. The contract lay before him, a devil's bargain, offering everything he'd ever wanted, at the cost of everything he was. His dignity, his identity, the very essence of his existence. "Think it over, Midnight," Thorn said, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "It's the only way your music will ever truly be heard. Or you can stay here, behind the kitchen door, playing for ghosts. The choice, Marcus, is yours." He turned and walked away, his expensive shoes tapping a rhythm of cold, calculated power, leaving Marcus alone in the stale air, staring at the face of the man who would steal his own. The silence stretched, unbearable, heavy with the weight of an impossible decision. The neon glow of the jazzman's hideaway sign bled into the damp alley, painting Marcus's face in sickly greens and purples. Thorn's words echoed, hollow and mocking, in the cavernous space where his hope had just been disemboweled. He stumbled past overflowing bins and discarded liquor bottles, the contract's invisible weight heavier than his trumpet case. He needed a voice that had seen this darkness before, a beacon in the industry's perpetual twilight. He found Lewis hunched over the upright piano in the club's staff room, a cigarette burning down to its filter between his gnarled fingers. The air was thick with stale smoke and the melancholic scent of cheap bourbon. Lewis, his face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom, didn't look up from polishing a key. He simply motioned to the stool beside him. "Thorn," Lewis stated, not a question, his voice a gravelly murmur. "He came for you, didn't he? Like a vulture circling a fresh kill." Marcus dropped onto the stool, the weariness in his bones settling deep. He recounted Thorn's offer, the shimmering promise of a wider world, eclipsed by the brutal condition. He watched Lewis's eyes, ancient and knowing, track the flight of ash from his cigarette. "They want my sound, Lewis. My notes. But not me." The last word was a strangled whisper, raw with betrayal. Lewis sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "They always do, son. Always have. For us, the music is a part of our soul, etched into our skin. For them, it's a product, commodity. And if the face that sells it ain't the right shade, they'll find another. They'll carve your soul out and put it in a pretty white box." He tapped a low C on the piano, a note that resonated with a profound, resonant sorrow. "I've seen it 100 times. Brilliance buried beneath a stranger's smile. I watched Jimmy, the ghost Jenkins, play saxophone like an angel, only for some pretty boy with an alto to stand on stage and lip-sync his solos while the records played through the radio." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So what do I do, Lewis? Stay here in the kitchen forever? Or let them strip me bare for the chance to be heard?" He clutched his trumpet, the cold brass a stark reminder of his silent passion. "It's not just about me. It's about Mama. It's about leaving something behind, something that screams I was here. I lived. I played." Lewis finally looked at him, his gaze piercing. "That's the devil's bargain, ain't it? The one they always offer. Your dignity for their dime. Your face for their fame. It's a bitter choice, Marcus. A choice no artist should ever have to make." He leaned back, exhaling a plume of smoke. "But I won't lie to you. The world out there, it ain't waiting with open arms for a colored man with a trumpet and a dream. Thorn's a snake, but he's a powerful snake. And sometimes, to kill a snake, you gotta dance with it first." Marcus spent the next 2 days in a blur of agonizing indecision. The vibrant pulse of the city outside his cramped apartment felt alien, mocking his internal turmoil. He saw his reflection in the greasy windowpane, a face worn thin by struggle, shadowed by a legacy of exclusion. This face, so familiar to him, was apparently a liability. He walked the streets, the insistent rhythm of his own conflict drumming in his ears. To accept was to betray himself, his heritage, every principle he held dear. To refuse was to sentence his music to a continued purgatory, to deny it the breath of life beyond the smoke-filled confines of the hideaway. He remembered his father, stoic and proud, working himself to an early grave for meager wages, his unspoken dreams dying with him. He remembered his mother, her eyes alight when he played, her belief unwavering. "Your music will touch the world, Marcus," she'd whispered. Could he fulfill that promise by becoming a ghost? The thought gnawed at him, a relentless drill boring into his soul. His trumpet lay untouched, a silent testament to his paralysis. Every note he had ever poured into its bell, every raw emotion, every unsung story, clamored for release. To remain unheard felt like a slower, more torturous death than the sacrifice Thorn demanded. The summons arrived on the third morning. A crisp, white envelope bearing Thorne's embossed letterhead. A single sentence, tomorrow. 3 o'clock. My office. The formality felt like a tightening noose. Thorne's office was a shrine to opulence, perched high above Manhattan like an eagle's nest. Polished mahogany gleamed under the afternoon sun, reflecting the city's indifferent sprawl. The air, thick with the scent of fine leather and ambition, was starkly different from the hideaway's lingering haze. Thorne sat behind a massive desk, framed by a panoramic view of skyscrapers reaching for the heavens. He offered Marcus a glass of amber liquid. Marcus declined, his throat tight. Midnight, Thorne began, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. I trust you've considered my proposition thoroughly. Marcus swallowed hard, the taste of ash in his mouth. It's unconventional. Thorne leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Unconventional? Or simply pragmatic? Let's be frank, Marcus. The world isn't ready for a black face on the cover of a mainstream jazz album. Not yet. Not for the millions of records we're talking about. It's not about talent. It's about marketability. It's a necessary evil to break the color barrier of perception, even if we have to make an end run around it for now. He gestured to the sprawling city below. Do you want to play for the few hundred souls crammed into a club? Or do you want your sound to echo through every radio, every home, across this entire nation? This isn't just about a record deal, Marcus. It's about building a legacy, about opening doors eventually for others like you. Think of it as a Trojan horse. Your music, hidden, but powerful enough to breach the walls. Marcus felt the weight of Thorne's words, a master manipulator weaving a tapestry of logic and veiled threats. A Trojan horse, a hollow victory. Arthur, your stand-in, Marcus said, his voice strained. Does he know? Thorne smiled, a chillingly confident flash of teeth. Arthur is a professional. He understands the mechanics of the industry. He's excited to be associated with such groundbreaking talent. He sees the bigger picture, just as I hope you do. Thorne picked up a pen, a gold Parker with an obsidian tip. This isn't about erasing you, Marcus. It's about amplifying you, giving your genius the platform it deserves. The alternative, as you know, is far less palatable. The doors are closed to you, Marcus. I'm offering you a window, albeit a small, obscured one. He pushed the contract across the polished surface. The words blurred into an unintelligible promise and an inescapable curse. Thorne's argument, though repugnant, resonated with a bitter truth Marcus had lived his entire life. He was trapped. This was the only window. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. Each stroke of ink felt like a surrender, a severance. He was signing away not just his likeness, but a piece of his very soul. The signature was a ghost, a promise whispered in the dark. Excellent, Thorne said, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. He leaned back, a subtle shift in his posture, a predatory satisfaction. Now there's just one more thing. He reached into a drawer, pulling out a thick, leather-bound folder. To ensure the purity of this endeavor, the artistic integrity, so to speak, we require absolute exclusivity. Not just for your recordings, but for any public performance. From this moment on, Marcus, your face must remain off every stage. Even the hideaway. Marcus's head snapped up, a cold dread washing over him. The air in the opulent office seemed to thin, the panoramic view outside suddenly a suffocating cage. He had expected to sell his face for the album, but to sell his presence. To never again feel the spotlight on his skin, the roar of a crowd, the connection of eyes meeting his as he poured his heart into his horn. Thorne's smile widened, revealing a glint of genuine malevolence. After all, he said softly, Arthur can't be seen performing while you are still making the rounds. That would rather defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city, oblivious to the quiet murder of a dream taking place high above its streets. Marcus stared at Thorne, not just a snake, but a viper, twisting the knife even deeper, ensuring that even the kitchen door was now closed to him. He was not just unseen. He was unheard, silenced, erased, and he had just signed the papers sealing his own disappearance. The air in the clandestine studio was thick, not with the familiar scent of stale gin and cigarette smoke that clung to Marcus's clothes after a gig, but with the sterile, chemical tang of fresh paint and disinfectant. This wasn't a club's backroom, bustling with the low thrum of anticipation and the clinking of ice. This was a tomb, soundproofed and sequestered in the quiet belly of a downtown office building, a place where sound was created to be devoured elsewhere, by unseen ears. He stood before the microphone, the polished brass of his trumpet glinting dully under the single overhead lamp. The room was small, a padded cell of creativity, with only the engineer, a silent, gaunt man named Silas, separated by a pane of thick glass. Thorne was never present during these sessions, a silent absence that spoke volumes. He didn't need to be there. His shadow loomed large enough to choke the oxygen from the room. Marcus raised his trumpet, the cool metal a familiar comfort against his lips. This was it. This was the raw, unadulterated essence of him, stripped bare. Here, in this isolation, his music was his confession, his rebellion, his only conversation. Every note that spilled from the bell was a secret whispered into the void. A cry of anguish, a roar of defiance, a lament for what was lost. He poured the agony of his erased future, the bitterness of the contract, the ache of his denied presence, into the valves, into the bell, into the very air. He played Midnight Serenade, a piece he'd composed years ago, born from the late-night quiet of Harlem streets, a bluesy, soulful tune that usually brought hushed reverence to a room. Tonight it was a eulogy. His fingers danced, a blur of practiced grace, each slide, each bend of the note, a testament to a talent that was now both his blessing and his curse. The trumpet wept, it soared, it raged. When the final, lingering note faded, the silence that followed was profound, heavy with unspoken grief. Silas, through the intercom, cleared his throat. That was exceptional, Mr. Thorne. He always called him Mr. Thorne, a chilling reminder of the identity he was assuming, even in this hidden space. Marcus merely nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight, his eyes burning. He felt wrung out, hollowed, as if his very soul had been siphoned off, bottled and sealed. Days blurred into weeks, filled with these clandestine sessions. Marcus worked like a man possessed, driven by a fury and a sorrow that he could only articulate through his horn. He composed new pieces on the fly, improvising, letting the music dictate its own painful narrative. The studio became his sanctuary and his prison, the trumpet his only true confidant in a world that was systematically erasing him. Each track laid down was a piece of him, meticulously crafted, only to be handed over, to be worn by another. It was a peculiar, perverse act of self-cannibalism. Then came the day he met Arthur Holloway. Thorne was there, perched on a stool in the control room, a predatory smile playing on his lips as Marcus packed up his horn. The door creaked open, and a young man stepped in, looking around with an almost childlike curiosity. Arthur Holloway was, Marcus observed, handsome. Too handsome, perhaps, for a jazz musician who was supposed to have the grime of the city and the grit of the blues in his soul. He had a shock of impeccably styled blonde hair, bright blue eyes that seemed a little too wide, and a fresh scrubbed innocence that Marcus immediately distrusted. He wore a crisp, tailored suit that spoke of privilege, not struggle. He carried a gleaming trumpet case, not scuffed or worn like Marcus's, but pristine, almost untouched. Marcus? Thorne purred, gesturing with a dismissive flick of his wrist. This is Arthur Holloway. Arthur, this is our maestro. The word maestro was laced with an irony that stung Marcus like a lash. Holloway's smile was disarmingly genuine as he extended a hand. A pleasure to finally meet you. Mr. Thorne has told me so much about your compositions. His grip was firm, but his eyes seemed to skate over Marcus, not truly seeing him, but rather an idea of him. I'm thrilled to be able to interpret your incredible work. Marcus's hand felt cold in Holloway's warm grasp. He managed a curt nod, his gaze piercing, trying to find the lie, the malice, the calculation beneath the smooth exterior. But there was nothing, only an earnest, almost vacuous enthusiasm. Holloway seemed truly oblivious, a beautiful, unwitting puppet, a complex knot tightened in Marcus's gut, resentment, sharp and bitter, for this man who would wear his face, steal his applause, claim his soul. But beneath it, a fleeting, unwelcome flicker of pity. Holloway wasn't Thorne. He wasn't the architect of this injustice. He was merely a beneficiary, a polished mirror reflecting a distorted reality. He saw himself as an interpreter, not a thief. He believed he was lending his image to a groundbreaking new sound. As Thorne had undoubtedly phrased it, oblivious to the vibrant, living heart of the man standing before him, whose sound this truly was. "You've quite a talent, they say," Holloway continued, oblivious to Marcus's internal turmoil, his voice light, almost breezy. "I've heard the demos. Astounding. A truly unique voice." He patted his own trumpet case. "I just hope I can do them justice." Marcus said nothing, simply staring, his silence a shield. He felt a profound weariness. This wasn't just about selling his music. It was about selling the very narrative of his creation, handing it over to a man who saw it as a blank canvas for his own superficial brushstrokes. Thorne clapped Holloway on the shoulder. "Arthur has a fantastic stage presence, Marcus. Charisma, you know. He'll connect with the audience beautifully." He emphasized connect, a cruel jab at Marcus's forced isolation. Holloway beamed, absorbing the praise. "I aim to please." Marcus turned away, the conversation an invisible brand on his soul. His voice, his hands, his very essence would now be filtered through this golden boy, this clean-cut, utterly unjazzed face. He was an unperson, an unheard genius, a ghost haunting his own masterpiece. Weeks later, the city air crackled with a new sound. It started subtly, a new tune heard from an open window, then another, then suddenly it was everywhere. "Midnight Serenade," credited to Arthur Holloway. Marcus stood on a street corner, shielded by the anonymity of a fedora pulled low, watching a crowd gather outside a record store. A large, glossy poster in the window depicted Arthur Holloway, trumpet in hand, a confident, slightly melancholy expression on his face. His expression, subtly mimicked from the notes Marcus had imbued with sorrow. The album title, Moonlit Reveries, seemed to mock him. A speaker blared the familiar, aching melody of his trumpet. Only now it was Holloway's sound, Holloway's triumph. The music, Marcus's blood and bone, was being celebrated, revered, devoured by the masses. People bought the record, their faces alight with discovery, pointing to Holloway's image, whispering his name. He bought a newspaper. The entertainment section screamed, "Arthur Holloway, the new king of jazz." A photo of Holloway, undeniably handsome, beamed from the page. The review praised his soulful interpretations, his innovative phrasing, his raw, undeniable talent. Every word was a lie, every accolade a theft. Marcus walked, the newspaper clutched in his hand, feeling like a phantom limb, an echo in the bustling metropolis. He heard his music spill from taxi radios, saw record sleeves featuring Holloway's face clutched under arms, witnessed women swoon at Holloway's name. His melody, a secret he had guarded, a passion he had lived, was now public property, belonging to a man who had merely put his face on it. He ducked into the familiar darkness of the hideaway, the very club he was forbidden to play in. From a shadowed corner booth, he watched the current band play. A waitress, a new face he didn't recognize, walked past, humming a familiar tune. His tune. "Heard of this Arthur Holloway?" the drummer asked, leaning over the bar, his voice a low rumble. "Kid's got something. Really something." Marcus gripped the glass of cheap whiskey, his knuckles white. The music, his soul, was everywhere, a celebrated sensation. But he was nowhere. He was a ghost haunting his own masterpiece. And the worst part? He felt a chilling certainty that Holloway's naivety was a beautifully crafted mask. That beneath the wide, innocent eyes, a far more dangerous ambition might just be simmering. Holloway wasn't Thorne's pawn. He was Thorne's mirror, reflecting back a darkness Marcus was only just beginning to comprehend. He felt a shiver, cold and visceral, run down his spine. He wasn't just erased. He was replaced. And the replacement was starting to look less like a pawn, and more like a predator in waiting. The city throbbed with a rhythm Marcus no longer recognized as his own. Yet it was everywhere he turned. Holloway's face, etched in sepia on magazine covers, stared from newsstands. Holloway's name, a whisper on women's lips, a boast from bar stools. And Holloway's sound, his sound, spilled from every open window, from the tinny radios of street vendors, from the polished dashboards of gleaming Cadillac taxis. It was a phantom limb, perpetually aching, a melody divorced from its creator, celebrated by a world that believed a lie. Marcus walked through Harlem, a ghost haunting his own masterpiece. He saw children mimicking Holloway's imagined trumpet gestures, heard men argue over the new Holloway style at barbershops. The irony was a suffocating cloak. He, Marcus Thorne, A man who still had to enter some clubs through the kitchen door was now a national sensation, entirely invisible. His compositions, once intimate conversations with his horn, were public property, attributed to a man whose greatest talent was his skin. One sweltering evening, the air thick with the promise of rain and the scent of jasmine, Marcus found himself drawn to the smoky glow of the Blue Note. Tonight, Clara Dubois was performing. He'd heard whispers of her, a voice like aged bourbon, a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. As he settled into a shadowed booth at the back, a tumbler of amber liquid warming his hand, she walked onto the small stage, a vision in emerald green, her hair a sleek, dark wave against her cheek. Clara didn't just sing. She inhabited the music. Her voice, rich and resonant, wrapped around the lyrics of a Bessie Smith classic, infusing it with a melancholic joy that made the sparse crowd lean forward as one. There was an honesty in her delivery, a raw integrity that resonated deep within Marcus. He saw in her what he strove for in his own music, truth, unfiltered and uncompromised. As her final note hung in the air, a shimmering vibration, the applause was reverent, almost hushed. Later, as she sat at a small, round table near the stage, sipping a glass of iced tea, Marcus felt an undeniable pull to approach her. He needed to speak to someone who understood music, not just consumed it. "Miss Dubois," he said, his voice a low rumble, stepping into the dim pool of light that spilled from the stage. That was transcendent. She looked up, her eyes, dark and intelligent, scanning his face with a discerning gaze. "Thank you," she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You a musician?" "I am," he nodded, a bitter taste rising. "Trumpet." "Ah, a man after my own heart," she chuckled softly. "You have a particular sound?" He felt a flash of pain, then forced a small smile. "I like to think so. I try to put truth in it." "Truth is a rare thing, isn't it?" she mused, swirling the ice in her glass. "Especially in this business. Most just chase the glitter." She paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "You know, I've been listening to this new fellow, Arthur Holloway. His latest album, Midnight Serenade. Have you heard it?" Marcus's breath hitched. He nodded, a tight knot forming in his stomach. "I have. It's truly remarkable," she continued, oblivious to the turmoil she stirred. "The compositions, they have a soul, a depth I haven't heard in years. So sophisticated, yet raw. It's like the trumpet isn't just playing notes. It's weeping, laughing, living. There's a particular ache in his phrasing, a way he bends the notes that just gets right under your skin. It sounds authentic, you know? Like he's lived every single one of those emotions." She looked at him, her eyes alight with genuine admiration for the music. Marcus could only manage a strangled cough, forcing himself to meet her gaze, to nod in agreement, to lie. Her words, meant as praise for a phantom, were an exquisite torture. She was describing him, Marcus Thorne, down to the very ache in his phrasing, validating his artistic brilliance even as she twisted the knife of his invisibility. He wanted to scream, to tell her the truth, to reclaim the ownership of his very soul. But the words died in his throat, suffocated by the unspoken rules of this segregated world. "He embodies a rare integrity," Clara concluded, a wistful smile gracing her lips. "It's refreshing to hear a young white musician play with such gravitas." The praise felt like ash. Integrity, gravitas, all attributed to the lie, to the embodiment of everything Marcus was forced not to be. He thanked her, his voice rough, and retreated into the darkness of the night, the elegant curve of her compliment a new, searing brand on his heart. Days bled into weeks. Holloway's success ballooned. The Midnight Serenade album was declared the sound of the season, a crossover hit. Marcus watched Holloway's manufactured interviews, saw the manufactured smiles, the carefully rehearsed anecdotes about the inspiration behind his music. The resentment festered, a venomous bloom in his gut. It wasn't just the stolen credit anymore. It was Holloway's uncanny ability to wear Marcus's soul like a perfectly tailored suit. He didn't just play the part. He was the part, an immaculate, white canvas upon which Marcus's truth was painted, then erased. Holloway wasn't just Thorne's pawn. He was Thorne's mirror, reflecting back a darkness Marcus was only just beginning to comprehend, the ease with which identity could be stolen, repackaged, and celebrated. One afternoon, in the dim, cluttered back room of Levy's music shop, where the air hung heavy with the scent of old wood and brass polish, Marcus found Sammy hunched over a battered upright bass. Sammy Washington, a man whose hands knew the fretboard like his own skin, whose ears were tuned to the subtleties of every chord, every inflection. They had played together for years, their music a wordless conversation. "Heard anything good lately, Marcus?" Sammy asked, without looking up, his fingers walking a mournful blues line. "Always something," Marcus replied, leaning against a stack of sheet music, feigning a casual air. Sammy finally straightened, his wise, tired eyes meeting Marcus's. He had the kind of face that had seen too much, understood even more. "Yeah, I've been listening to that Holloway kid. Midnight Serenade." Marcus's stomach clenched. He waited, dreading the inevitable praise. "He's good, no doubt," Sammy continued, plucking a resonant open string. "Got a real touch." But he paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's something about it. A familiar echo." Marcus swallowed hard. "Familiar?" Sammy nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as if listening to a ghost. "Yeah, like I've heard those lines before. That way he holds a note, lets it bleed just so. Or that turn he takes in the bridge, right before the chorus kicks back in. It's uncanny, like listening to a conversation you just had, but from the next room over." He looked directly at Marcus, a flicker of suspicion, or perhaps recognition, in his eyes. "Doesn't it strike you, Marcus, as strangely familiar?" The air in the small room thickened, suddenly charged. Sammy, a man who knew Marcus's unique style intimately, who had spent countless nights weaving his bass lines around Marcus's trumpet, had heard it. He hadn't just heard the notes, he'd heard the soul. The comfortable anonymity Marcus had cultivated, the shield of invisibility, felt suddenly fragile like cracked glass. Sammy wasn't just asking a question. He was planting a seed, a dangerous seed of truth, right in the heart of the deception. And Marcus, for the first time, felt not just the chill of being erased, but the searing heat of imminent exposure. The carefully constructed lie, so intricately woven, was beginning to unravel, thread by perilous thread. Arthur Holloway's trumpet solo soared, pristine and technically faultless, through the hushed expanse of the recording studio. Each note was a perfectly sculpted bead of sound, polished to a high sheen. The melody, intricate and melancholic, was undeniably Marcus's own. A piece Marcus had poured a lifetime of unseen struggle into. Yet, as Holloway brought the final, sustained note to a flawless close, a chill snaked up Marcus's spine. It was a beautiful performance, certainly, but it was also utterly bloodless. From his perch in the control room, a cigar smoldering between his fingers, Thorne offered a curt nod. "Good, Arthur. Excellent control. But next time, remember the ghost in the phrasing. It's not just notes. It's a lament, a question asked and unanswered." Holloway, perpetually earnest, wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. "I thought I put enough emotion into that last run, Mr. Thorne." Thorne merely scoffed. "Emotion, Arthur, is something you perform. It's a tool. Marcus, come here." Marcus, who had been a silent, suffering observer from the soundproof booth, felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He moved, a shadow obeying a master's call, and stood beside Holloway. He was the ghost, indeed. "Show him, Marcus," Thorne commanded, his voice devoid of warmth. "Show him how your sorrow sounds." Marcus took up his trumpet, the brass feeling suddenly alien, heavy with the weight of its betrayal. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath, and played the same passage. The first note wasn't just struck. It bled. It was raw, ragged around the edges, a whisper of pain that transcended technique. The vibrato wasn't clean. It was a tremor, a human imperfection that told a story of loss and longing. He didn't just play the melody. He lived it, each phrase a testament to unacknowledged genius, to dreams deferred. When he finished, the silence in the room was profound, weighted with the echoes of something true and terrifyingly exposed. Holloway stared at him, his face a canvas of something close to awe, perhaps even shame. I see what you mean," he murmured, his own horn suddenly looking like a toy in his hand. "Good," Thorne snapped, breaking the spell. "Now, Arthur, emulate that. Don't copy it, internalize it. Make it yours, or rather, make it ours." He lit a fresh cigar, the smoke curling around his cruel smile. "Remember, Arthur, you are not just playing music. You are playing a role, the greatest jazz trumpeter alive. And the audience expects a certain verisimilitude. The lie was a living thing now, breathing, growing, demanding more and more of Marcus's essence. He was a puppeteer pulling his own strings through another man's hands, and the irony was a bitter poison. He coached Holloway for hours, day after day, not just on technique, but on the very feeling of his life. He taught him the subtle bend of a note that spoke of Harlem's midnight streets, the sudden burst of joy that defied despair, the deep, soulful sigh that was a black man's prayer in a world that refused to listen. Holloway, to his credit, was a diligent student, a talented mimic, but the true spirit remained elusive, a bird he could cage but never truly tame. Then, the cracks began to appear, not just in the suffocating silence between Marcus and his past, but in the glaring light of public scrutiny. Marcus sat at a sticky counter in a dingy diner, the aroma of stale coffee and burnt toast clinging to the air. His eyes scanned the freshly delivered New York Chronicle, the jazz section a ritual he still couldn't abandon. His breath hitched. The headline screamed in bold, elegant serif, "The Holloway Phenomenon. Too perfect? Too soon?" The byline belonged to Evelyn Hayes. Marcus knew her name well. She was the sharpest mind in jazz criticism, a woman whose prose was as incisive as a surgeon's scalpel, unafraid to expose pretension or laud genuine artistry. He began to read, his fingers trembling, tracing the elegant curves of her words. Hayes dissected Holloway's debut album, praising its technical brilliance with a nuanced appreciation for its complexity, its emotional depth. But then the blade emerged. Mr. Holloway's sudden, unparalleled mastery, she wrote, seems to have bloomed overnight, untraceable in any prior recordings or public performances. His previous work, while competent, showed little hint of the breathtaking originality and profound emotional resonance now evident. One is left to wonder at the genesis of this transformation, this almost uncanny leap from respectable talent to what some are calling the voice of a generation. Her words were a subtle accusation, a query hanging heavy in the jazz-filled air. Where did this come from? She spoke of the music's unnatural consistency, its flawless execution that, paradoxically, sometimes feels too flawless, lacking the jagged edges of true, raw invention. She mused aloud, her critical voice a sly whisper, about the music's deep roots in a tradition that Holloway, for all his evident talent, has not historically inhabited. Marcus read it again, a strange mix of terror and vindication surging through him. Terror because Evelyn Hayes was asking the very questions Thorne had worked so hard to bury. Vindication because someone, finally, heard past the polished surface and sensed the ghost beneath. He thought of Sammy, of the flicker of suspicion in his friend's eyes. The lie was not as invisible as Thorne had promised. He folded the newspaper slowly, the newsprint leaving smudges on his trembling fingers. The article would be a spark, a dangerous whisper in the hallowed halls of jazz. Thorne would be furious. Holloway would be rattled. And Marcus? He felt the weight of the lie pressing down, isolating him further. He was a phantom, his voice echoed by another, his soul dissected and critiqued, yet he could not claim it. He walked the familiar streets of Harlem, seeing Sammy laughing outside a club, his bass case leaning against the wall. Marcus ducked into an alley, his heart hammering, unable to face the man who had played beside him for years, unable to explain why his music now flowed from another's horn. He was a ghost haunting his own life, his own art. The phone in his cramped, solitary room began to ring, a shrill, insistent demand in the oppressive silence. He stared at it, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. It was a number he didn't recognize. Hesitantly, he lifted the receiver. "Mr. Johnson?" A crisp, intelligent female voice inquired, each syllable perfectly articulated. "My name is Evelyn Hayes. I believe we have something very important to discuss." The receiver, still warm from Evelyn Hayes' call, felt heavy in Marcus's hand, a sudden anchor in the shifting sands of his life. Her voice, calm yet insistent, had promised a discussion, a conversation that felt less like an offer and more like an unavoidable summons. He had spent his life orchestrating silence, a phantom limb in the body of his own music. Now the world, it seemed, was beginning to hear the ghost. He tuned into the WNYC broadcast the following afternoon, the crackle of the radio a familiar hum against the backdrop of his simmering anxiety. The show, Spotlight on Sound, was a prestigious platform, the kind Marcus had only ever dreamt of gracing. Today it belonged to Holloway. Marcus sat by the window, a single ray of weak afternoon sun illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, mirroring the unsettled particles within him. And now, a true innovator in American jazz, the man whose trumpet sings with the soul of 1,000 angels, Mr. Julian Holloway. The announcer's voice boomed, thick with manufactured enthusiasm. Marcus closed his eyes. The 1,000 angels. He knew them well. They were his. Holloway's voice, smoother than Marcus remembered from their fleeting encounters, began to speak. He answered questions about his technique, his influences, his meteoric rise. Thorne, Marcus imagined, would be seated just out of sight, a puppeteer pulling invisible strings. Holloway's answers were polished, almost rehearsed, yet Marcus could detect a subtle tremor beneath the veneer, a fleeting hesitation before certain pronouncements. He knew that tremble. It was the tremble of a man performing under duress, the fear of a missed note or, worse, a false one. Then came the question that hung heavy in the studio air, a deceptively simple query about his creative process. Mr. Holloway, your compositions are remarkably mature for a musician of your youth. Where do you find such depth, such lived experience? Holloway chuckled, a brittle sound. Well, inspiration comes from everywhere. The streets of New York, the people, the hustle, and, of course, the invaluable contributions of _creative collaborations _ The phrase hung there, a deliberate wobble on a tightrope, just a fraction too long, too significant. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a carefully placed pebble, hoping to trip someone, anyone. Miles away, in her Greenwich Village apartment, Evelyn Hayes leaned closer to her own radio, her elegant brow furrowed, a faint frown deepening the lines around her intelligent eyes. Creative collaborations, she murmured, a glint of recognition sparking in her gaze. It wasn't the first time she'd heard that vague, easily dismissed phrase from artists who had mysteriously found their voice. But combined with the raw, untamed power in Holloway's latest album, a sound she intuitively felt was too authentic, too visceral to be entirely his own. It spoke volumes. Her fingers, long and delicate, tapped a rhythm of suspicion against the polished wood of her desk. She had called the right man. Marcus, too, had heard it. The echo of creative collaborations resonated with the words Thorne had spoken in that dimly lit office, the ones that had sealed Marcus's fate. Holloway hadn't just hinted. He'd telegraphed it. A silent plea, perhaps, or a desperate attempt to assuage a conscience that was beginning to chafe. Marcus felt a perverse satisfaction, a dark humor in watching Holloway squirm. The gilded cage was tightening. Later that evening, the club where Holloway was scheduled to perform vibrated with a charged atmosphere. Marcus, having been granted entrance through the back door as usual, kept to the shadows near the kitchen, the aroma of sizzling onions and stale beer masking his own scent. He watched from a darkened alcove as Thorne cornered Holloway in a secluded hallway, their voices hushed but sharp. Thorne's eyes, usually cool and calculating, were chips of obsidian, narrowed in a silent threat. He didn't shout. His anger was far more chilling than that. Creative collaborations, Julian? What in God's name were you thinking? His voice was a low growl, each word a venomous dart. You endanger everything. Your career, _my investment. Do you understand the damage a single misstep can do? Holloway, usually so poised, looked like a child caught stealing a cookie. His shoulders slumped, his handsome face pale and drawn. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Thorne. It was just a turn of phrase, a nod to the musicians I work with. His voice was thin, reedy, utterly devoid of the commanding trumpet sound he replicated on stage. Thorne leaned in, invading Holloway's personal space. A turn of phrase that could unravel a masterpiece of industry, Julian. You think I don't see the whispers? The journalists sniffing around? You're a puppet, Julian. A very expensive, very profitable puppet. Don't forget who holds the strings. And if those strings snap, Thorne didn't finish the sentence. But the implication hung heavy, a guillotine blade suspended in the air. Marcus watched Holloway flinch, a pathetic display of fear and submission. The guilt on Holloway's face was palpable, a raw wound finally exposed. He wasn't just a thief. He was a trapped man, his own ambition having built his prison cell. A flicker of something akin to empathy, dangerous and unwelcome, sparked in Marcus's chest. He remembered Thorne's persuasive charm, his silver tongue. Marcus had seen it too, that seductive glitter of possibility, the offer of a world he'd been denied. He had resisted. Holloway had not. As Thorne finally stalked away, his presence leaving a chill in the air, Holloway remained slumped against the wall, head bowed, hands gripping the fabric of his expensive suit jacket as if to keep himself from unraveling. It was then that his eyes, red-rimmed and despairing, met Marcus's in the shadows. A jolt, a silent acknowledgement passed between them. Holloway straightened slowly, his gaze holding Marcus's, an unspoken plea in their depths. Minutes later, a hand touched Marcus's shoulder as he stood alone by the back exit, contemplating his escape. He turned. Holloway. His face was etched with a desperate resolve. A man at the precipice. "We need to talk," Holloway whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the distant thrum of the jazz band. "Somewhere private. Tonight." Marcus merely looked at him, his expression unreadable. His heart hammered, a frantic drum solo. He had never imagined this moment. The phantom and the face standing side by side. He felt a surge of rage, cold and sharp, at the audacity, the hypocrisy of it all. Yet, beneath the anger, a curious dread mingled with a sliver of desperate hope. He nodded once, curtly. They met an hour later, under the cold, indifferent glow of a street lamp in a deserted alleyway behind the club. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. Holloway's tailored suit looked incongruous in the gritty setting, a stark contrast to Marcus's worn coat. "I know what you're thinking," Holloway began, his voice strained, a raw wound. He ran a trembling hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "You think I'm a monster, a thief, and you're right. I am." He took a shaky breath, his gaze fixed on the grimy brick wall beside Marcus. "But it wasn't. Not entirely by choice. Not at first." Marcus remained silent, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression hard. "He wouldn't make this easy. Thorne, he approached me months ago," Holloway continued, his words tumbling out, desperate to escape. "He'd heard me play, said I had talent. Yes, but not that special something." He flinched, as if admitting a profound inadequacy. "He said he knew someone who did. Someone whose sound was _otherworldly_. He showed me your records, Marcus. Not the official ones, but the bootlegs, the ones passed around in the clubs. He told me he could give me that sound. Make me a star. All I had to do was be the face." Holloway finally met Marcus's eyes, a tortured confession in his own. "He said you wouldn't be able to make it. Not really. Not like this. Not to a mainstream audience. Not with the way things are. He said it was an opportunity for both of us. A way for the music to be heard. Even if the truth was bent a little." His voice cracked. "I knew it was wrong, Marcus. From the very beginning I knew. But the lure of it, the fame, the recognition, the chance to finally mean something I couldn't resist." He painted a picture, Marcus. "A golden future, built on your genius, and my willingness to compromise." The words hung heavy in the air, a poisonous miasma. Marcus felt a cold fury rising, but it was mixed with something else, a strange, bitter understanding. He had seen the way the industry devoured men like him, spit them out, leaving only echoes. Thorne hadn't just seduced Holloway. He had preyed on the systemic injustices that choked off true talent. And now, Marcus's voice was low, dangerous. "Now your conscience decides to wake up?" Holloway recoiled slightly, but pressed on. "It's not just my conscience, Marcus. It's Thorne. He's a monster. He owns me. He owns us. And I can't live like this anymore. Every note I play is a lie. Every applause, every article, it's a dagger." He looked around the desolate alley, as if expecting Thorne to materialize from the shadows. "I know things, Marcus. Things about Thorne, about the contracts, about other musicians he's done this to. We could expose him. Together." He extended a hand, not for a handshake, but as if offering a lifeline in the darkness. "I can help you reclaim your music, Marcus. If you'll let me." Marcus stared at the outstretched hand, then back into Holloway's haunted eyes. The offer was audacious, desperate, and rife with peril. To trust the man who had stolen his identity, to forge an alliance with the face of his own torment. It was anathema. Yet, in Holloway's raw confession, in his palpable fear, Marcus saw a reflection of his own powerlessness, his own quiet desperation. He saw an opening, a dangerous path back to himself. But it was a path he would walk with caution, his guard up, his trumpet silent but ready to sound the alarm.
"What do you propose?"
Marcus finally said, his voice a low growl, the raw edge of a trumpet's blare. And what makes you think I wouldn't just expose you right now? Holloway swallowed hard, his gaze darting nervously. Because, he whispered, I have something that could bring Thorne down for good, something that proves everything. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, his fingers fumbling, and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, thick and aged. He pressed it into Marcus's hand. This is a copy. He thought he'd destroyed them all. Marcus unfolded the document under the dim light, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. It was a contract. His own name, Marcus Johnson, was scrawled at the bottom, alongside Thorne's signature. But the date was months before Thorne had ever offered him the deal. It was a pre-signed, predated agreement, making it appear as if Marcus had willingly sold his rights to his compositions and performances, retroactively. A legal trick, a fraud of the highest order. It was the original sin, the blueprint for his entire dispossession. And it proved Thorne had planned the theft long before he'd even met him. Marcus looked up, his eyes meeting Holloway's. The paper crackled in his hand, a fragile key to a locked past, a treacherous map to a volatile future. He had a choice. Walk away and remain a ghost, or step into the fire with the very man who had helped light the match. He had wanted the truth. Now he held a piece of it, a piece that implicated not just Thorne, but Holloway himself in a deeper, more calculated betrayal than he could have imagined. And Holloway clearly knew it. The alliance had begun, not in trust, but in a shared, chilling terror. The predated contract, brittle with age and deceit, felt like a live coal in Marcus's palm. The ink, a faded testament to Thorne's insidious foresight, implicated not only the producer but the quivering man before him. Holloway, his face a roadmap of fresh anguish, offered a tentative, almost pleading glance. He had them all signed, not just mine. He kept a whole ledger of these back then. A contingency, he called it, for all the prodigies he was going to find. Most of them never saw the light of day. But you were different. Marcus's throat was tight. He looked from the paper to Holloway's pale, earnest face. The alliance, forged in shared fear, now contained an even deeper layer of betrayal. Holloway had known. He had participated, however unwillingly, in the initial calculated theft. And you kept this, Marcus finally managed, his voice a low growl. All this time. Holloway flinched. I couldn't destroy it. Felt important. A constant reminder. I told myself it was for when the time was right. When I was brave enough. He wrung his hands. I'm trying, Marcus. I swear. I have to make this right. The confession, raw and desperate, hung in the stale air of the backstage alley. Marcus folded the contract carefully, tucking it into his own jacket. He didn't trust Holloway, not fully, but the document was undeniably powerful. A fragile key. Making it right, Holloway, is going to burn everything down. Holloway indeed began to burn, not with grand, self-immolating gestures, but with the subtle, insidious flickers of a man trying to exorcise a demon. He'd started small. During a radio interview for his upcoming national tour, discussing the evolution of jazz, he leaned into the microphone, a tremor in his voice. The real genius of this music, he'd mused. It doesn't always wear a famous name. Sometimes, it's the ghost in the machine, the unseen hand, the heart beating in the shadows. We owe so much to those unacknowledged influences. The host, eager to move on to more marketable soundbites, had politely steered him back to his own celebrated compositions. But a seed had been sown. Later, at a sold-out showcase at the prestigious Apollo, Holloway dedicated a new, haunting ballad, Echoes of Harlem, not to a lover or a personal struggle, but to the vibrant, soulful spirit of a place and a people whose music has shaped my very being, even if their names aren't etched in brass. A few critics found it unusually poignant. Most simply chalked it up to Holloway's evolving artistic maturity. But Thorne noticed. Oh, he noticed. The producer, a predator with a keen sense for the slightest ripple in his carefully constructed pond, saw the shift in Holloway's eyes, the haunted guilt, the sudden, uncharacteristic earnestness. He saw the nervous tick in Holloway's jaw, the way he'd started to avoid Thorne's direct gaze. Thorne summoned him to his opulent office overlooking Central Park. The city sprawled beneath them like a conquered kingdom. Arthur? Thorne began, his voice silken, dangerously calm. You seem distracted lately. Your artistic temperament, I suppose? He steepled his fingers, his gaze unblinking. That little dedication at the Apollo. Unseen hands. Rather poetic. Anything I should know about these unseen hands? These ghosts? Holloway swallowed, his collar feeling suddenly too tight. Just artistic inspiration, Thorn. A recognition of the roots of the music. You know how passionate I am about authenticity. Thorn smiled, a chilling absence of warmth. Authenticity, commendable quality. But let's not forget what truly makes a star, Arthur. Presentation, control, a tightly woven narrative. Authenticity, untamed, can be rather messy. And messy, as we both know, can be very, very expensive. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. We have a good thing going, don't we, Arthur? Don't let a sudden fit of conscience unravel it all. Some secrets, once exposed, have a way of consuming everyone involved. The threat was clear, the implication chilling. Holloway left Thorn's office feeling like a fly caught in a spider's web, the threads tightening around him. Yet, the seed of his defiance, once planted, refused to wither. Evelyn Hayes, the journalist, was no stranger to messy authenticity. Holloway's cryptic pronouncements had resonated with her. Coupled with Marcus Johnson's elusive answers and Clara's subtle discomfort, a persistent hum of suspicion now vibrated beneath her awareness. She began pulling on loose threads. Her first stop, the dusty, smoke-stained clubs of Harlem where Marcus had once commanded the stage. She interviewed bartenders with memories as long as their bar tabs, old musicians whose fingers were gnarled but whose ears remembered every note. She learned of Marcus Johnson, the trumpet player who could make a stone weep, who was destined for greatness. He was going to be big, miss. An old drummer named Silas rasped, his eyes watery with the past. Biggest thing since Satchmo, some said. Then nothing. Poof. Like he never existed. Right round the time Holloway came round, coincidentally enough. Silas paused, polishing a non-existent spot on the bar. Funny thing, Holloway's got that sound now. That real sound. Almost like he absorbed it whole. He winked, a glint of knowing mischief in his rheumy eyes. Evelyn's heart gave a jump. She thanked Silas, leaving him with a generous tip. She had heard of Billy, Marcus's longtime accompanist, and she tracked him down playing piano in a low-rent downtown joint. Billy, wary and guarded, offered little directly, but his silences spoke volumes. When Evelyn mentioned Holloway's name, Billy's face tightened. He looked away, fiddling with a loose key on his piano. Marcus, he had a gift, Billy said finally, his voice strained. A unique gift. The kind you can't just buy. Evelyn noticed the deliberate pause before buy. The way his gaze flickered to the shadows, as if afraid of being overheard. She didn't press. She had enough. The fragments were coalescing into a disturbing image. Clara knew the gift intimately. She knew Marcus's every inflection, every soul-wrenching vibrato, every triumphant wail that soared from his horn. She knew them from the records, yes, but also from shared nights in smoky clubs, from quiet moments where the music poured from his heart like liquid fire. Tonight, on stage, performing a piece titled Midnight Reverie. A piece Clara knew, without question, had sprung from Marcus's very core. She felt a profound, chilling disconnect. Holloway, standing beside her, looked the part. He held the trumpet with professional grace, his posture impeccable. But the sound was a meticulous imitation, a practiced echo. He hit every note, sustained every phrase, but the raw, uninhibited emotion, the aching vulnerability, the sheer truth that had vibrated from Marcus's instrument, was utterly absent. Holloway's eyes, darting over the audience, seemed distant, preoccupied. He played the music, he didn't feel it. Clara, her fingers flying over the piano keys, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, trying to reconcile the technically perfect but utterly lifeless performance with the visceral power of the recordings she played every night. It wasn't just a difference in interpretation. It was a fundamental void. It was Marcus's soul, meticulously excised. When the piece ended, and the applause washed over them, Holloway offered a polite, somewhat stiff bow. Clara, however, remained rooted, her gaze fixed on the trumpet in Holloway's hand. The instrument looked so right there, yet so wrong. The doubts that had been simmering for weeks now solidified into an icy certainty. She knew. She didn't know how, but she knew. This wasn't Holloway's music. And the real author was nowhere to be seen. Marcus, caught between Thorn's tightening noose and Holloway's increasingly reckless acts of contrition, felt the walls closing in. The predated contract, tucked securely in his jacket, was a ticking bomb. He saw Holloway's subtle attempts at credit, heard the nervous tremor in his voice when they spoke briefly on the phone. He knew Holloway was trying to atone, but his clumsy efforts were a dangerous gamble, risking exposure not just for Thorne, but for Marcus himself. He knew Evelyn Hayes was asking questions, too. Billy had warned him after her visit, his voice clipped with concern. The journalist was getting closer, circling his past like a hawk. The truth was no longer a distant threat. It was a hungry beast, clawing at the fragile veneer of his stolen identity. He had wanted justice, but the path to it was a minefield, each step threatening to detonate the lives of everyone involved. He gripped the trumpet, his fingers tracing the cool brass. The notes inside him yearned to break free, to claim their rightful voice. But if they did, who would be left standing in the ashes? He had to make a move. He had to decide if he would let Holloway's desperate guilt unravel everything, or if he would seize control of the narrative himself. Because the beast was already at the door, and its roar was growing louder with every passing day. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the next tremor would shatter their world. And he still didn't know who would be caught in the fallout. The stale air in Marcus's cramped apartment felt thicker than usual, heavy with unspoken accusations. Clara stood by the window, her back to him, but the tension radiating from her was a physical force, pressing him into the threadbare armchair. The street lamps outside cast long, skeletal shadows across the peeling wallpaper, mirroring the fear coiling in his gut. He had seen the look in her eyes the moment she'd walked in, a chilling cocktail of sorrow and fury he'd never witnessed directed at him. Her voice, when it finally came, was a low, dangerous hum. "I heard them, Marcus," she began, her words slicing through the silence like shards of glass. She turned then, her face a mask of profound disappointment. Her eyes, usually warm and bright, were now cold and distant, like stars extinguished. "I heard Thorne and that man Holloway in the studio. Whispers, snatches of conversation. About contracts, about your sound. And then I went to the record store. I bought the album. I played it, Marcus. And I knew." Her gaze pinned him, stripping away every defense, every carefully constructed lie. The way Thorne fumbled when they asked him about his technique. The way he avoided questions about the inspiration for Midnight Nocturne. And the music, oh God, the music. You, Marcus, every single note, every heartbreaking, soaring, impossible breath of it. It's your soul, poured into a horn, and someone else is taking the credit. He tried to speak, to deny, to deflect, but the words caught in his throat, tasting of ash. He could only stare at her, the weight of his secret finally crushing him. "Why, Marcus?" she whispered, a tear finally tracking a path through the dust on her cheek. "Why would you let them do this? Why would you let them steal you?" The question hung in the air, a bell tolling his judgment. He swallowed hard, the shame a bitter bile in his mouth. "You don't understand, Clara. You couldn't possibly." His voice was a ragged whisper. She took a step closer, her hands clenching into fists. "Don't tell me I don't understand. I understand theft. I understand indignity. I understand what it means to be invisible in this city. But I never understood selling your own damn soul to be heard." The accusation stung, sharp and true. He pushed himself from the chair, desperation lending him a raw energy. "Soul? What good is a soul, Clara, if it's trapped behind kitchen doors? What good is a sound if it dies in smoky backrooms, heard only by those who will never speak your name?" His voice cracked, the carefully guarded pain finally erupting. "They offered me a contract," he confessed, the words tumbling out, unbidden, unstoppable. "A real contract, for an album, to be heard, Clara, to finally have my music reach beyond these walls, beyond these dark corners. But the condition," he squeezed his eyes shut, the memory a fresh wound. "The condition was Thorne, a white face, a white name, to be the face of the album, while I would be the ghost in the machine." He opened his eyes, pleading with her to see past the betrayal, to see the man cornered by a brutal world. "What was I supposed to do? Keep my dignity, as you say? Stay unheard? Stay hungry? Let the music die inside me because the world wasn't ready to see a black man on the album cover? I thought if they just heard it, Clara, if they just heard the music, then one day, they couldn't deny the source." His confession was a torrent of anguish, years of suppressed anger and humiliation pouring out. They told me it was the only way, that my sound was too good to waste, but my skin was too inconvenient. I made a choice, Clara, an impossible choice. To sell my face, yes, to sell my name, but never my sound. My sound, my music that's still mine. It's still us. Clara stared at him, her chest heaving. The initial rage had given way to a profound, gut-wrenching grief. No, Marcus, it's not. Not if it comes through his lips. Not if it legitimizes their lie. You paved the way for them, Marcus. You gave them permission to erase us. Her voice broke, a raw, primal sound of heartbreak. I loved you. I believed in you. And you shattered everything we stood for. She turned abruptly, walking back to the window, her shoulders shaking. He wanted to reach for her, to explain, to beg for understanding. But her words had built an impenetrable wall between them. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument, thick with the unfixable chasm that had opened. Miles away, in the hushed, deserted offices of Thorn Records, Holloway moved with a grim, deliberate purpose. The glow of the desk lamp illuminated the stark lines of his face, etched with exhaustion and a desperate resolve. He had been a coward for too long, a complicit ghost in Thorn's monstrous charade. But the walls were closing in, the whispers growing louder, Evelyn Hayes's name echoing in the corridors of his conscience. He opened a hidden compartment in his desk, revealing a small, unassuming metal canister. Inside, nestled among layers of felt, was a master reel of tape, clearly labeled, the original recording of Marcus's iconic solo, before Thorn's name was ever whispered near it. This was the raw, unadulterated truth. His hand trembled as he pulled a sheet of paper towards him, dipping his fountain pen into the inkwell. The words flowed, a confession born of agonizing guilt and the certainty of his own impending ruin. He wrote of Thorn's avarice, of the industry's systemic racism, of the impossible choice Marcus had been forced to make. He detailed his own spineless complicity, the fear that had kept him silent, and the festering regret that now consumed him. He knew this letter was a career obituary, a public shaming, but it was also, finally, an act of atonement. A desperate plea for a clean slate, even if that slate was etched with the scarlet letter of his own betrayal. He sealed the letter and the tape in a heavy, unmarked envelope. With a deep, shuddering breath, he called a discreet courier service, the kind that asked no questions, simply delivered. The package was addressed to Evelyn Hayes. He watched from his office window as a nondescript sedan pulled away, disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. He had lit the fuse. The explosion was coming. His world, Thorn's world, Marcus's world. All of it was about to ignite. Hours later, the first rays of morning light filtered through the blinds of Evelyn Hayes's small apartment, painting stripes across a pile of urgent newspaper proofs on her coffee table. She was already awake, already mentally drafting her next expose, the taste of stale coffee bitter on her tongue. A sharp knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a young man in a dark uniform holding a thick, heavy package. Ms. Hayes? Special delivery. Her brow furrowed. No sender's name. No return address. Just her name, meticulously typed. A shiver of professional instinct ran down her spine. This felt different. This felt big. She took the package, the weight of it suddenly immense in her hands. Back inside, she tore open the heavy paper. A reel of tape, and a letter, thick with handwritten script. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, then her breath caught. Her grip tightened on the paper. The name, Marcus Thorn, leaped out at her. Then, identity, deception, original recording. The world around her seemed to recede, replaced by the pounding of her own blood in her ears. She looked from the letter to the reel of tape, then back again, her mind racing. Evelyn Hayes had chased shadows for weeks, piecing together fragments of a story she suspected was monumental. Now, the full, devastating truth lay in her hands. An undeniable, explosive confession that would rip the facade off an entire industry. The fuse had been lit, and the sound of its burning was already a roar in her ears. The city awoke not to the usual clang of milk bottles and the rumble of early trams, but to a cacophony of outrage. Evelyn Hayes had not merely published a story. She had detonated a bomb. The New York Globe screamed Thorn's shame. Genius stolen, identity buried, alongside a grainy, yet undeniably striking, photograph of Marcus. Every newspaper in the nation mirrored the exposé, their headlines a chorus of condemnation. Radios crackled with the breathless reports, Holloway's wavering voice confessing his complicity, interspersed with snippets of a trumpet solo so profoundly, devastatingly beautiful, it left listeners weeping. It was undeniably Marcus. The raw, unadulterated truth. The music industry, a meticulously constructed edifice of glamour and deceit, began to crack. Record label executives, producers and publicists huddled in smoke-filled rooms, their faces pale, their conversations a frantic scramble to contain the fallout. The name Marcus Thorne, once whispered with reverence, now tasted like ash. Miles away, in a penthouse office overlooking Central Park, Marcus Thorne's world was not merely cracking, it was collapsing. He stood, shoulders rigid, by his massive mahogany desk, a copy of the Globe clutched in his trembling hand. The ink smudged onto his palm as he crushed the paper. Forgery, blackmail, delusion, he roared into the phone, his voice a guttural snarl that echoed off the opulent walls. Holloway is a drug-addled liar. Marcus is an opportunist, a disgruntled employee. His public relations team worked feverishly, issuing frantic press releases, attempting to drown the truth in a deluge of counter-accusations. But the public had heard Holloway's confession, a detailed, agonizing account, and they had heard Marcus's music. The undeniable truth, once a whisper, was now a roar. Thorne was losing control, a sensation utterly alien and terrifying to him. The city, still reeling, demanded answers. A high-stakes press conference was hastily called, less an anodyne invitation to dialogue and more a summons to judgment. The grand ballroom of the Astor Hotel was transformed into a gladiatorial arena, its velvet ropes holding back a throng of reporters whose flashbulbs popped like distant gunfire. Microphones bristled from every corner, eager to capture the industry's fall from grace. In a quiet room off the main hall, Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical entity. He traced the worn brass of his trumpet, its smooth, cold surface a familiar comfort. He had faced countless audiences, but never one like this. Never one where his very identity was on trial. Clara, her hand a warm anchor on his arm, looked at him, her eyes reflecting a blend of fear and fierce pride. "You don't have to do this alone, Marcus," she murmured, her voice steady. She had been his rock these past few days, her initial shock having transmuted into an unwavering resolve. She had seen the raw injustice, the theft of a soul, and it had ignited a fire within her. Holloway, a ghostly figure in a rumpled suit, stood apart, his gaze fixed on the floor. His eyes, when they finally met Marcus's, were brimming with a painful mix of regret and burgeoning strength. "They're trying to discredit me, Marcus," he said, his voice a barely audible rasp. "They'll say I'm insane, but I told the truth, and I'll stand by it. For you, for what was done." He held out a crumpled sheet of paper. "I wrote a statement, if you want me to read it." Marcus nodded, a profound sense of gratitude washing over him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the unheard voices, all the stolen melodies. A sharp rap on the door. "Mr. Thorne is about to begin." Marcus took a deep breath, the scent of polished wood and nervous sweat filling his lungs. He looked at Clara, then at Holloway, a silent communion passing between them. He thought of his mother, of the music that had always been his solace, his rebellion, his truth. He thought of all the back doors he had entered, all the indignities he had swallowed. Not anymore. He walked out first, Clara a half-step behind him, Holloway following, head held a fraction higher than before. The room erupted. Flashbulbs exploded, a blinding blizzard of light. Reporters surged forward, a cacophony of shouted questions. "Mr. Thorne, what do you say to these allegations? Is it true, Mr. Thorne, that you stole Mr. Marcus's music?" Thorne, already positioned at the podium, a forced smile plastered on his face, looked like a man drowning in a silk suit. He raised a hand, attempting to quell the storm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, these are scurrilous, baseless accusations. My team has prepared a statement," but his words were drowned out by the sudden, powerful presence of Marcus stepping up beside him, his gaze sweeping the room. The clamor subsided, replaced by a tense, electrified silence. The sheer audacity of Marcus standing there, uninvited, unchallenged, was a shock in itself. "My name is Marcus," he began. His voice, though not loud, carried an undeniable resonance, each word precisely weighted. "For years, my music has been heard, but my face has been hidden. My soul has been laid bare, but my name has been erased. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Mr. Thorne claims I am an opportunist, that Mr. Holloway is deluded. The truth is far simpler and far more insidious. He locked eyes with Thorne, who visibly flinched. The truth is that this industry, like so many others in this nation, was built on a foundation of theft. It was built on the premise that a black artist's talent is a commodity to be exploited, their identity a liability to be masked, their humanity a detail to be ignored. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Thorne, regaining a semblance of composure, lunged for the microphone. This is outrageous. This man is a fraud. He is attempting to exploit. Marcus raised a hand, not in appeal but in quiet command. Mr. Thorne, you've had your say for far too long. Now it's my turn. He glanced at Holloway, who nodded almost imperceptibly, and at Clara, whose eyes shone with defiance. You speak of forgery, Marcus continued, his voice rising, imbued with a passion that silenced every skeptical murmur. You speak of delusion, but I have proof. Proof that you, Mr. Thorne, signed a contract promising me artistic freedom while simultaneously demanding my erasure. Proof that you recorded my music under false pretenses and sold it as your own. Proof, etched into every note, that this music— He reached for his trumpet, its polished bell catching the relentless glare of the lights. Belongs to me. He brought the trumpet to his lips. A hush fell over the room, profound and absolute. Thorne, mouth agape, lunged again, but Marcus's security, silently positioned by Clara, held him back. And then Marcus played. The first notes were a lament, a haunting, soulful cry that spoke of forgotten dreams and stolen joy. It wasn't the flamboyant, dazzling technique he often employed in the clubs. This was raw, stripped-down emotion, the very essence of his being pouring through the brass. The melody swelled, weaving a tale of struggle, resilience, and ultimately, an unwavering spirit. It was the same music the nation had been listening to for months, but now, heard from the true source, it took on an entirely new, devastating power. Reporters forgot their questions, their pens frozen in midair. Cameramen lowered their equipment, transfixed. Tears streamed down the faces of hardened journalists. The music was not just a sound. It was a testament, a confession, an accusation, and a declaration of war. It spoke volumes without a single word. It was a reclaiming, not just of a song, but of a stolen life. When the last, lingering note faded, the silence that followed was even more profound than before. Then, a single, thunderous clap broke it, followed by another, and then a wave of applause that rose like a tide, crashing against the walls of the ballroom, echoing with a force that transcended mere appreciation. It was a roar of recognition, of shared understanding, of righteous anger, and of newfound hope. Marcus lowered his trumpet, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the faces in the room. He had laid bare his soul, his talent, his truth. The industry was in an uproar. Thorne's empire was visibly crumbling, and the nation was riveted. But as the applause continued to swell, drowning out Thorne's furious, inaudible protests, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The battle was far from over. The real fight, for justice, for identity, for ownership, had just truly begun, and its outcome was terrifyingly uncertain. His defiance had captivated the world, but it had also painted a target squarely on his back. And Thorne, in his furious, cornered desperation, was a man capable of anything. The aftermath was less an explosion and more a controlled demolition. Thorne's carefully constructed empire didn't shatter in a single, cataclysmic burst, but crumbled brick by meticulously placed brick, each falling stone, a testament to the rot beneath. The headlines screamed, not of artistic triumph, but of corporate malfeasance and racial exploitation. Thorne's empire built on stolen notes. The unheard truth, industry mogul exposed. Within days, prominent artists began severing ties, their public statements carefully worded but their intentions clear. Investors, smelling blood in the water, pulled out with ruthless efficiency. Lawsuits piled up like unplayed scores, each one a nail in the coffin of Thorne's once unassailable reputation. Marcus watched it all unfold from a small, rented room in Harlem, the noise of the city a stark counterpoint to the quiet storm raging within him. He felt no triumph, only a weary vindication. The public fury, while righteous, was a fickle beast. He knew the industry would try to absorb him, to sanitize his defiance into a marketable commodity. Offers flooded in, each more lucrative than the last, promising him the stardom he'd been denied, but on terms that still felt like a subtle form of surrender. They wanted to package his pain, not empower his voice. He refused them all. Holloway, too, had vanished from the public eye. His name, once synonymous with discovering talent, was now irrevocably linked to Thorne's scandal. The whispers of complicity, of willful ignorance, followed him like a mournful echo. Yet, unlike Thorne, Holloway possessed a flicker of self-awareness, a nascent desire for something beyond profit. He sold his shares, paid off his debts, and retreated to the quieter, less glamorous corners of the music world. He began frequenting smaller clubs, listening, not for the next big hit, but for the raw, unpolished brilliance that reminded him of his own youth and of Marcus. He found solace in mentoring, quietly guiding young black musicians through the treacherous currents of an industry still struggling to evolve. He taught them not just technique, but the often bitter lessons of self-preservation, of intellectual property, of ownership. It was a quiet atonement, a deliberate choice to build rather than exploit, one aspiring artist at a time. He rarely spoke of Thorne or of Marcus, but his actions spoke volumes. For Marcus, the path was less clear, but more vital. The applause at the press conference had been intoxicating, a moment of profound recognition. But true ownership, he realized, wasn't about public acclaim. It was about agency. It was about creating a space where the next Marcus could thrive without compromise, without sacrificing their face for their sound. He started small. With the unexpected, anonymous financial backing from a handful of sympathetic figures, journalists he'd moved, artists who'd been wronged, even some former Thorne employees quietly seeking their own redemption, Marcus founded Cadence Records, an independent label built on a single, audacious principle. Artists own their masters. He then established the True Note Collective, a cooperative dedicated to providing legal counsel, financial literacy, and a robust support network for black musicians navigating the labyrinthine music industry. It was a radical idea, a direct challenge to the extractive models that had dominated for decades. The early days were arduous. He was an artist, not a businessman, but his passion was infectious. He learned the intricacies of contracts, distribution, and promotion. He surrounded himself with like-minded individuals, lawyers tired of defending the indefensible, engineers dedicated to authentic sound, artists eager to escape the machine. It wasn't about mainstream superstardom. It was about creating a parallel universe, a sanctuary where art could flourish untainted by exploitation. And then there was the club. Not a grand ballroom or an exclusive speakeasy, but a space in a revitalized corner of Harlem, a former theater he co-owned with a handful of community investors. They called it the front door. One rain-slicked Tuesday night, almost 3 years after the press conference, Marcus stood on its modest stage. The air was thick with the scent of good coffee and something vaguely sweet, not illicit smoke, but the lingering fragrance of the evening's infused teas. The room was packed, not with industry power brokers, but with a vibrant, diverse tapestry of faces. Young couples, old-timers, students, families. All had entered through the front door. All sat at tables where glasses were filled with equal measure for everyone. His trumpet, polished to a gleam, felt like an extension of his very soul. He closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the years, the battles fought, the dignity reclaimed, pressing down on him. He thought of his mother humming spirituals. He thought of the kitchen doors, the back alleys, the hidden shame. He thought of Thorne's sneering face, Holloway's conflicted gaze. Then, he opened his eyes, a flicker of defiance, of triumph, burning within them. He brought the trumpet to his lips. The first note was a soft sigh, a lament for what was lost, for the countless unheard voices silenced by injustice. It swelled, gaining strength, weaving a narrative of resilience, of protest, of unwavering hope. It was a new cadence, born not of bitterness, but of an unshakable belief in the power of truth. His fingers danced, coaxing melodies that soared and dipped, telling a story that transcended words, a story of ownership defined not by profit margins, but by the integrity of the art, by the respect for the artist, by the shared human experience that music alone could truly capture. The sound filled the room, rich and potent, a testament to a dignity reclaimed. Heads nodded, feet tapped, and a woman in the front row, her eyes glistening, wiped away a silent tear. This wasn't just music. It was a promise that here, in this space, And in the world that Marcus and his collective were slowly but surely building, the music would always be celebrated for its true source. The notes hung in the air, a vibrant, soulful declaration. The unseen was now seen, the unheard was finally heard, and the meaning of ownership had been redefined, irrevocably, by truth and integrity.